Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you, trust me. In the time you were on the show last year to now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favourite performance of you so far.
There is a moment burned into the memory of anyone who watched it. A 13-year-old girl walks onto the America's Got Talent stage wearing a floral dress, her curly hair bouncing nervously, her eyes darting around a room full of thousands of strangers. She looks terrified. She looks like she wants to disappear. Simon Cowell leans back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who has seen everything, who has heard every voice, who has sat in that chair long enough to know, within 3 seconds, whether someone has it or not. He is already bored before she even opens her mouth. And then she opens her mouth. What came out of Courtney Hadwin that evening in 2018 was not what anyone expected. It was not the polished, carefully rehearsed performance of a child who had been trained to impress. It was something rawer than that. Something older. A sound that seemed to belong to a smokier era, a different century, a different soul altogether. Her voice cracked open the room like thunder splitting a quiet sky, and within seconds, the audience was on its feet. Simon Cowell, the man who famously does not cry, who has rejected thousands of hopeful singers without blinking, sat forward in his chair with an expression that nobody had seen on his face before. Something moved behind his eyes. Something cracked. An entire world watched it happen. That audition video went on to be viewed more than 300 million times. 300 million people pressed play to watch a 13-year-old girl from a small former mining village in County Durham, England, shake the foundations of one of the biggest talent shows on earth. Howie Mandel slammed the golden buzzer before the song was even over. He compared her to Janis Joplin. Simon called her a lion. And in the weeks and months that followed, the music industry descended on Courtney Hadwin like wolves who had just spotted something worth chasing. But here is what those 300 million people did not see. They did not see what happened after the confetti fell. They did not see the recording sessions where grown adults told a 14-year-old girl what kind of music she should be making. They did not see the transatlantic flights, the label meetings, the carefully constructed image that had nothing to do with who Courtney actually was. They did not see a young girl slowly losing herself inside a machine that was never built for someone her age. And they certainly did not see Simon Cowell grappling with what his role in all of that might have been. That reckoning, quiet and private as it may have remained, is the part of this story that cuts deepest. Because Simon Cowell did not just discover Courtney Hadwin. He signed her. He put the full weight of his label, Psycho Music, in partnership with Arista Records, behind her name. He handed her a dream that came with a price tag she was too young to read. And then, as the industry does, he moved on to the next season, the next audition, the next talent. Courtney was left holding something beautiful and broken at the same time, and she had to figure out how to carry it alone. She was born on the 6th of July, 2004 in Heselden, a small, quiet village near Hartlepool in the northeast of England. It is the kind of place that does not produce many international stars. It produces community, grit, and a particular brand of Northern English resilience that you either have or you do not. Courtney had it from the beginning. Her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie, recognized something unusual in their daughter early. Her mother saw the potential before anyone else did. Her father did what fathers do when they believe in their children without reservation. He took on extra work, delivering pizzas, filling up the car, driving her across the Northeast to every audition, every open mic night, every small competition that might move her one step closer to something bigger. She began singing seriously around the age of 9 or 10. By 11, she was performing at school events, and a video of her singing Say Something at a lunchtime open mic went viral on Facebook. Classmates who had sat next to her in class suddenly heard something they had never noticed before. She buskied in local spaces to help pay for singing lessons. She attended Shotton Hall Theatre School, took classes at Peanuts Masterclasses, studied under Kate Surr's School of Music, and trained with Vocal Ovation. She was not coasting on natural talent. She was working for it every single day. WY 2015, she had entered Teen Star UK in Newcastle and reached the grand final with a version of Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love. The following year, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award. She opened for Sister Sledge at the South Tyneside Festival in front of 18,000 people. She auditioned for The Voice Kids UK, earned a spot on Danny Jones's team, and made it all the way to the final. Every one of these steps was taken by a child who wanted nothing more than to sing, who found meaning in music the way some people find it in breathing. It was not a career to her yet. It was a calling. And then came America's Got Talent. Season 13. She was 13 years old, and she walked out onto that stage in a way that suggested she would rather be anywhere else. Simon Cowell looked at her the way he looks at everyone, with the patient, slightly condescending curiosity of a man who expects to be disappointed. And then she sang. And the room changed. And Simon changed. He would later describe the moment as one of those rare experiences where you hear someone, and you immediately understand that you are in the presence of something you cannot manufacture. You can train singers. You can coach performers. But you cannot teach what Courtney had. That was given to her by something none of them could explain. After the live shows ended, Simon signed her to Psycho Music in partnership with Arista Records. She was 14 years old. She described signing the deal as a dream come true. She said she was excited to make original music and stay true to herself. And in that statement, if you listen carefully, you can already hear the tension beginning to form. She wanted to stay true to herself. The industry wanted something marketable. Those two things are not always the same, and for a 14-year-old who had not yet fully discovered who she was, the gap between them was enormous. The recording sessions began. The label brought in songwriting teams and producers. They pitched sounds, beats, themes, and directions. They had a vision for what Courtney Hadwin should be, and it was built around the comparisons to Janis Joplin, around the idea of a raw, bluesy, vintage-sounding soul singer who could be packaged and sold to a modern audience. There was nothing malicious in it. This is simply how the music industry operates. But the person on the receiving end of all those decisions was a teenager who was still figuring out who she was, who was still in school, who still called a small English village home. The machine that the industry operates is built for adults who have already developed a thick enough skin to survive it. Courtney had not had nearly enough time to grow that skin. She later described feeling that everyone around her was telling her who she should be and what she should sound like. She described losing control of her own path during the very years when most teenagers are just trying to understand themselves. She was traveling between the United Kingdom and the United States, expected to deliver polished pop soul tracks on tight deadlines, expected to be media-ready and press-ready and performance-ready at all times. She described it as exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. She described bouts of overwhelm. She described feeling isolated, surrounded by industry professionals, missing the realness of home, missing the simplicity of who she had been before any of this happened. The social media posts began to slow down. The public appearances became less frequent. Fans started asking questions. Where had she gone? Was she okay? The silence that followed her initial explosion of fame was loud in a particular way, the way that silence always is when it comes from someone the world expected to hear from constantly. There were no dramatic public announcements. There was no scandal, no breakdown that played out on camera. There was just a young woman quietly stepping back from something that had taken more from her than anyone had anticipated. Simon Cowell, for his part, returned to his role as judge and executive. The next season of America's Got Talent began. The next group of hopeful performers walked through those curtains. The machine kept moving the way machines do, without sentimentality, without pause. If he thought about Courtney during those years, if he reflected on what his decision to sign her had set in motion, he did not say so publicly. He was never a personal mentor to her in any meaningful sense. He was the gatekeeper who discovered her, the executive who believed enough in her commercial potential to attach his label to her name, and then the businessman who moved on when the next opportunity came along. That is not a criticism. That is simply an honest description of how the industry functions. But understanding that does not make the story any less heartbreaking. Because here is the thing about Courtney Hadwin. She did not break. She bent, and she bent significantly, and there were years when the people who loved her were genuinely worried about what was happening to the girl they knew. But she did not break. She went home. She went back to County Durham, back to the northeast of England, back to the roots that had made her in the first place. And she started over on her own terms, with her own voice, at her own pace. She began working with Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, a man with credits alongside legends like Etta James and Joe Cocker, someone who understood what it meant to make music that came from a genuine place rather than a calculated one. Together, they started building something real. Songs like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, Breakable, and That Girl Don't Live Here began to emerge. These were not polished pop soul crossovers designed to meet a label's brief. These
were confessional, raw, emotionally honest songs about vulnerability and anger and identity and the particular kind of pain that comes from feeling like you have been turned into something you did not choose to be. Critics who heard them used words like fearless. They said she sounded like thunder. They said she burned like fire. In September of 2025, Courtney Hadwin released her debut album, Little Miss Jagged. She was 20 years old. The album had been years in the making, not because she was slow, but because she refused to release something that did not feel completely true. It blended soul, rock, funk, punk, and R&B in a way that defied any single category, which was entirely the point. She co-wrote every song with Kevin Bowe. She described the album as a collection of coming-of-age songs, as the most vulnerable thing she had ever shared. So vulnerable, she said, that it frightened her. In an interview, she told listeners that she had been so open with this record that putting it out into the world felt genuinely scary. And yet she did it anyway, because that is who Courtney Hadwin is when no one is telling her who to be. The response was everything the early years had promised. Fans who had watched her audition video in 2018 and wondered what had become of that extraordinary girl finally had their answer. Critics marveled not just at her voice, which had only deepened and grown more nuanced with time, but at the songwriting, at the emotional intelligence of the lyrics, at the confidence of someone who had clearly come out the other side of something difficult and chosen to make art from the wreckage. A stripped-down, mic-less video performance of one of her singles left viewers breathless. A performance at Carnegie Hall in April of 2024, where she was personally selected by industry legend Clive Davis to open a gala and pay tribute to Janis Joplin in front of a room full of music royalty, was covered by journalists as a defining moment in her artistic rehabilitation. The girl who had been compared to Janis Joplin at 13 had grown into an artist who could honor that comparison without hiding behind it. And Simon Cowell? He watches from a distance now. He remains one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry, still searching for the next great talent, still sitting in that chair with his practiced poker face. Whether he has reflected on what happened with Courtney, whether there have been private moments of something resembling regret, is something only he knows. But the story of Courtney Hadwin is not a story that an honest person can tell without pausing on the role that early, overwhelming industry attention plays in the lives of young artists. It is not a story that resolves cleanly into a lesson, because the music industry is not a place where lessons are easily learned or widely applied. What it is, though, is a story about something that turns out to be more powerful than any record deal or any label or any television show. It is a story about what happens when a person refuses to let the world's version of them replace the real one. Courtney Hadwin grew up in a small village in County Durham with parents who believed in her and drove her to auditions and watched her become someone the world wanted to claim as its own. She survived being claimed. She survived being packaged and pitched and processed and shaped by hands that meant well but did not fully understand what they were handling. And then she came home and she sat down at her own desk and she wrote her own songs, in her own voice, on her own terms. That is the story. Not the audition, as extraordinary as it was. Not the golden buzzer or the 300 million views or the record deal, or even the Carnegie Hall moment, as meaningful as all of those things are. The real story is quieter than any of that. It is the story of a young woman who almost lost herself to the very dream she had worked her entire childhood to reach, and who chose, when it mattered most, to find her way back. Simon Cowell may have opened a door for Courtney Hadwin, but she is the one who decided which room she was willing to walk into and which one she was going to build herself. And in September 2025, standing on the other side of everything she had been through, Courtney Hadwin released Little Miss Jagged and reminded everyone who had ever doubted her journey that the most powerful thing she has ever possessed was never the voice that stunned a studio audience into silence. It was the will to use it on her own terms. That cannot be signed away. That cannot be packaged. That cannot be managed by a label or shaped by a producer who has his own vision for who you should be. That belongs